Hey everyone, so imagine having just killed most of your villains and you're running a game. Whoops, Blizzard seem to have seen that problem, and because of that they've begun to widen the scope of the lore, now to encompass the cosmic chart of Chronicle. It's pretty exciting for us lore nuts, but yeah, it's at the stage now where a simple pre-expansion event, that's not enough to lay out a new expansion setting. So, bearing in mind that Blizzard often work 2 to 3 expansions ahead of themselves, well, turns out there's a lot more Shadowlands in World of Warcraft right now than you may think, and frankly, thinking is a lot of effort, so why not manage your passwords with today's sponsor, Dashlane. They're my personal password manager of choice, and they're one that does far more than that, also offering dark web scanning, a VPN, and more. And you'll get 10% off with my code at the link down in the video description. Now, Dashlane will generate a high security password for all of your different sites, and then through its extensions, it automatically logs you in. And yes, that means that using best security practices is literally more convenient, and you can now even use Dashlane as iOS's default autofill, which is super handy to me. All your info is locally decrypted using your master password, so even if Dashlane was hacked, well, it would be like breaking into the bank and then finding out that the bank doesn't actually have the key to the vault. And also, it will even alert you if a website that you use has had a data breach. You get all of that in one app across all your devices, and if you follow my link and use promo code Bellular, you will get 10% off. So, thanks to them for sponsoring this content, and with that, let's get into the video. The Drust in life were practitioners of death magic. Now, this was based on their belief in figures such as Odyn and the mortuary religions built up around the halls of valor. Now, when the descendants of the Kultirans defeated the Drust, their spirits went to Thros, otherwise known as the Blighted Lands. And then, okay, right, in BFA we all know that, but here's the reveal. Ian has confirmed that Thros is part of the Shadowlands. Not only that, he also confirmed that it lies within the realm of Ardenweald. Now, it was confirmed that Thros is the region of Ardenweald that is the most infected by the old god's Emerald Nightmare. Now, this tying of the Emerald Dream and the Shadowlands together is massive in terms of its lore implications. With Ardenweald representing the Emerald Dream within the Shadowlands, we are seeing this layering of the realms. We've got the Shadowlands wherein it's set, we've got reality, which the Drust attack, we've got the Emerald Dream, the cosmic counterpart of the Shadowlands, and then the Nightmare, a void influence in the Shadowlands. How Blizzard decide to untangle this big knot of realms, that will dictate much of the future lore. I mean, if they go full Lifelands and Shadowlands, and then show the Nightmares infecting both of them, and then tie that into the likes of the Arbiter, yeah, the WoW lore is going to get really wild. The Death Knight class Order Hall quest chain has constant interactions with the Shadowlands. Now, this chain is centered around the Lich King's belief that to defeat the Legion, the 4 horsemen must be reformed with new, more powerful souls. Now, it is mentioned throughout this quest chain that these individuals deserved the peace of death. Now, I think we then see, with the context of Shadowlands, that this was the Lich King drawing out anima-rich souls from the Shadowlands. Now, we don't have an exact date for when the machinery of death broke, but if Whitemane died during the events of Vanilla, then we can assume that her evil deeds in life sent her straight to the Maw. She even states that her death was full of anguish, so this may be confirmation that certain souls can be drawn from the Maw with powerful death magic. Now, past that, the Dark Riders of ACHERUS play a role in the Order Hall campaign. They live within the realm of the Shadows, and that is a confirmed region of the Shadowlands. And during that quest chain, Salinar sent champions into the Shadowlands to gather powerful items from powerful souls, such as Arugal and Putris. So clearly, he was using that anima to reanimate the new steeds. But things get even more wild because Salinar also tells players that time moves differently in the Shadowlands. He claims that for the years since, between when we last met him during the DK intro, only days had passed for him. Now that is mental, and if we're to think of, say, the Son of Time title for Muzala, then, I mean, the implications only get deeper, especially when you think about who empowered Ner'zhul. Now, as for Salinar's time, well, Blizzard could have it be that time distortion is like a punishment of Revendreth, and that would reduce the overall impact of this line in the lore, or they could make it a fundamental part of the Shadowlands, where we could go into the Shadowlands expansion, we could come back, and maybe years could have passed. And if Blizzard did that, I mean, that would let them clean the board and pretty much start new with a new expansion. GUL'DAN clearly knew more about the Shadowlands than we initially thought. Before the fight in the Nighthold, he clearly states, "Your pathetic horde will fall to dust. In the end, death will inherit this world, and she will be waiting. So, yeah, we can assume this means that Gul'dan knew about Sylvanas' plan and its wider implications for the Shadowlands. Hell, this could even be interpreted as knowledge of the Arbiter, who of course is a female character who waits for us in death. But things get deeper. Gul'dan drops the headpiece of the Shadow Council. Now, its flavor text reads, "The headpiece is the symbol of the Shadow Council," and it later says, "with a deep connection to the Shadowlands." So if we are to follow the implications of this line, then Gul'dan, and by extension the Lords of the Burning Legion, had knowledge of the Shadowlands since at least Warcraft 1. And then if that is true, I mean, it would be pretty darn significant for the lore overall, and they probably were for far longer. Now, this casual knowledge of the Shadowlands, this actually continues when we consider Ner'zhul. He has, in both of his incarnations, met his end in the Shadowlands. So, originally, Ner'zhul's body was destroyed, and his soul was shackled to the Shadowlands through the Helm of Domination. That is a plan that was clearly in the works since before the Second War, and it's one that we have explored in depth in this video. Click the thing. Now, in the alternative Warlords of Draenor fate, he ends up in the Edge of Reality, a region of the Shadowlands, and then he's destroyed. Now, this area is said to be the most void-affected area of the Shadowlands. What does that mean? Well, it means that with that, and with Thros, we have got 2 Void incursions into the Shadowlands. And that's pretty darn curious considering how the Void seemingly is just consistently worried about death. But here's the thing, there's even more. Darian Morgraine was on Draenor researching that incarnation of Ner'zhul. And he talked to the player of Ner'zhul just being an orc, dabbling in powers beyond his comprehension. And he later tells us that his goal is to work out how the original orc warlocks bound souls and controlled undead. So yes, that is even more clear evidence of the Legion dabbling in Shadowlands, and yet another years-old Shadowlands breadcrumb being put into World of Warcraft. Odyn has a long history with the Shadowlands, so he needed to find a way to interact with the Shadowlands and then to subvert the natural workings of the Machine of Death in order to fill up the Halls of Valor with his Val'jar. The beginning of this process is documented in the Legend of Odyn, and the section titled The Keeper's Eye tells us of his first look into the Shadowlands and how he saw ghostly wraiths with no faces that were made of death itself. And as he looked, the Chosen of Aman'Thul was afraid. Now, the duality put forward by the legend, that Odyn saw life within the Shadowlands and death on Azeroth, positioning these realms as a cyclical machine. And we can see this most clearly represented in Ardenweald, but I do think that this cyclical mechanic also does feed into the redemption and the purpose that souls seek in their covenant. The legend then ends with a statement on the nature of life and death on Azeroth. Referencing the Val'jar, it says, "Like life, they shall be powerful, like death, they shall be eternal." And this potentially is a dynamic that player characters could fit into, as being alive will give them the power to affect the eternal workings of death. Elune is an incredibly mysterious character, and she may actually represent the last frontier of pure lore speculation, as the old gods once did long ago. With Shadowlands taking us on our first full adventure through the cosmological realms of the Warcraft universe, I expect we will learn a lot more about her. Now, during Legion, there was a secret storyline, okay? And this would unlock Uuna as a pet. Now, she had been trapped in a realm of the Shadowlands named a Dark Place, and it was filled with soul eaters. Uuna was blind during the beginning of the story, but once reaching Lake Farathim, she described actually being able to see the player. Why? Well, it's after she witnessed the light of Elune. And this tells us that the light of Elune has an effect on the Shadowlands. Further to that, with Ardenweald being present in the Shadowlands, and of course Elune's deep connection with the Emerald Dream, we actually may see Elune being positioned as a similar role to the Arbiter, but for a different realm of existence. Indeed, when the nightmare dragon Aranicus was cleansed during Vanilla, it was by the light of Elune. And if you want more on that, check out our latest complete history of World of Warcraft episode. We now know there is a more fundamental connection between the Valkyr, the Kyrians, and the Spirit Healers, but there are several other interactions of note with Spirit Healers. Now, some of this is recontextualized lore rather than Blizzard specifically seeding Shadowlands content, but the implications certainly are there. One example is Anara, a named healer in Cataclysm. She has a romantic relationship with the spirit of Azuragos. Now, that was part of a story where the Blues were in existential threat, so adventurers were actually sent into the Shadowlands to bring him back to reality. So there's that. Now, there's actually more. Later in Uuna, we see the rather dynamic nature of a soul's final resting place in the Shadowlands, as we actually see a deep-sea Murloc spirit healer. Now, we do know that Murlocs can form notions of religion, so we can assume the same of an afterlife. And then this has really significant lore implications, because we can therefore assume that for creatures with a self-aware sense of mortality, there actually pretty much will be a realm of the Shadowlands for them. And this is also true of the Arakoa in the Spires of Iraq, who have a Dread Raven spirit healer. Now, this does actually raise questions of how much, the KYRIANs actually rule this whole thing, or maybe if the KYRIANs, as seen through an Azerothian humanoid lens, just happen to look that way because that's how our characters' brains and, sort of context actually processes them. So now that it's all laid out, I think clearly the Shadowlands have been a part of World of Warcraft's lore for a very long time indeed, but it really is only the last 2 to 3 years that Blizzard has seen a more definite direction emerge for it as an expansion. This will explore new lore, it will recontextualize previous story arcs, and it will open up a lot of opportunities for the lore to explore. We're currently in a period of just pure speculation, and our understanding of the Shadowlands will develop substantially with a whole new system of meaning, and of course with a new cast of raid bosses and much more. Certainly, I think Shadowlands is going to be the expansion that sets out the next few expansions. I mean, tied into what they've done during Legion and BFA, and I think, a lot more of that cosmological chart will be explored, and I think we're probably going to know what is up with Elune. And actually, on the topic of Elune, stay tuned next week. We have got a real cracker on Elune, and I think you're going to love it. Thank you very much for watching this video, and with that, I will see you next time.